Hi, this is Carson with Troy, and I have with me science fiction author Skyler Ramirez. Skyler, thank you for getting on with me today. You have a couple series out. The first one, I have the first book here. I don't know, it might be reflective, but Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes. And book eight just came out. Is that correct? I saw book eight just come out.
That is correct. And by the way, super excited and honored to be here. Yeah, book eight, the worst mercenaries in the border systems just came out, and lots of people picking it up. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. And then you have the epic space opera, The Four Winds, or Four Worlds,
Yeah,
excuse
the
me,
four
Four
worlds.
Worlds.
Yep.
And then set in the same universe, A Star Nation in Peril, which the
Yeah,
third book just came out earlier this year. Is that correct?
it did. So Star Nation in Peril is in the same universe as Dumb Like Dead Heroes. Four Worlds is in its own universe. It was actually the first series I started writing. I've got Star Nation in Peril. Third book is out. That's it for that series. It's just a trilogy. But it was a lot of fun to write and really explores a different side of the Dumb Luck Dead Heroes universe. Dumb Luck Dead Heroes is more of a comedy. It's got a lot of comedic elements in it. There's a little bit of comedy in A Star Nation in Peril, but it's really more of an action thriller.
Okay.
It's about one of the side characters from Dumb Luck Dead Heroes, a very elite assassin, and how she tries to regain a little bit of her humanity. So it was a lot of fun to write to stretch myself in that other direction.
So, what was some of the thought process of pursuing this side story in the same universe?
Well, so this has been a recurring side character. She's in the first book, she's in the second book, she's in the fourth book, and actually plays a pretty major role in the fourth book of Dumb Luck Dead Heroes. And then she comes back in and out. She's kind of the foil to Brad Mendoza and Jessica Lynn, the main characters in Dumb Luck Dead Heroes. You're never quite sure if she's their friend or their enemy. She pulls them out of trouble, throws them into trouble because she's got her own agenda. She's got her own bosses, and her interests don't always align with theirs. But you get these little glimpses of her humanity in Dumb Luck Dead Heroes, of her doing things that benefit them that she probably didn't need to do and might even upset those she works for. And when I started writing Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes, I asked myself the question of, like, how broken can a person be and still come back from it? And so you've got Brad Mendoza, who's this has-been alcoholic screw up, just killed 500 civilians plus because he made a decision that now he can't live with. It turns out the decision itself wasn't bad, but he just can't live with the consequences. You've got Jessica Lynn, who survived some pretty terrible things. And I did a little bit of the same thing with A Star Nation in Peril. And as I wrote this, Heather Kilgore is her name, as a side character. She's this assassin, went to prison at the age of 14 for killing her stepfather, who was trying to assault her. So, something we can definitely sympathize with. And then was taken out of prison after killing a few more people in there in self-defense, and offered her freedom, quote unquote, in exchange for joining this shadowy government organization that basically enacts the will of this Star Nation's king. And so the question with her was, how brainwashed and just regimented can someone be and still find their humanity? And so it was a lot of fun to explore, and I got to bring in a lot of other characters from the universe that have popped up in the other novels as well. So I had a blast writing it.
That's fantastic. And complete trilogy, Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes. Book nine's coming out later this year. How many books are you planning on that one?
I'll probably keep writing those till people stop reading them.
Awesome.
They're just a lot of fun. You look at J.N. Chaney with 30 plus books in some of his series, and I think there's an appetite out there for these long running series in the sci-fi community. And so, the day that people stop buying the books, I'll probably hang up that series and move more of my attention to other ones. But it's the most fun series to write, so I think I'll keep writing it until people tell me to stop.
So, what was the genesis of the story?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. My first novel, I wrote The Four Worlds, The Truth, which was my first ever novel. It was this 900-page behemoth. I followed up with book two in the Four Worlds series, Subversion, which was this 1,000-page behemoth. And no one wants to read 900 pages from an author they've never heard of. And so I got some advice from some people. Hey, try writing something shorter and see if you can get it to sell. Because I think in my first year with those two novels, I made $300 in royalties off of maybe $3,000 in ad spend. It just wasn't moving. And so I decided, hey, and it was this epic sci-fi, very serious, genetic engineered abilities. It was fun, but it was an investment to get into it. There were a lot of characters everywhere, a lot of side stories. And so I decided to go the opposite direction. And like I said, the genesis was how messed up can a person be and still bounce back from it? So I envisioned this just absolute loser, and his name is Brad Mendoza. Like I said, he made a mistake. He killed 500 civilians. You find out later that he killed them to save 5,000 other civilians, but he still can't live with that. And so he's basically trying to drink himself to death. His wife leaves him. He gets divorced. His father-in-law is the fleet admiral who controls his fate, or his ex-father-in-law, sends him to the end of nowhere, the armpit of the galaxy, this little system called Gerson. And there he is. He hasn't even read his orders. He's taking control of the titular worst ship in the fleet, the HMS Persephone, and he is just ready to leave the Navy. And the only thing that keeps him from leaving the Navy is the smile it would put on his ex-father-in-law's face. And so he decides to stick around for a little while, but this tiny little ship, I think the most highlighted quote in the book is something to the effect of, his first glimpse of it, he thinks to himself, it looks like what a kindergartner would draw if you asked them to draw a Navy ship and they hated the Navy and everyone in it and wanted them to collectively die from embarrassment. And so he gets on this ship. And I literally, for the first half of the book, just set out to make the reader hate this guy. He's apathetic. He's drunk most of the time. He's, having, inappropriate fantasies, we absolutely don't go into because it is a teenager and young adult friendly book, but he's having this like internal monologue about like how hot he thinks his executive officer is. And you just cringe to read him. And then over the course of the book, he slowly starts to show this glimpse of the good captain he used to be. And then over the course of the series, he turns into a real hero, albeit a reluctant one. But when I sat down to write that book, I'd written this 900-page behemoth way too long. In fact, I've got a copy of the second one right here, and you can see just beefy. And so what I did was I said, I'm going to write it short. So it was 25,000 words, 140 pages for the worst ship in the fleet.
In comparison.
I'm going to write it, yeah, super small. I'm going to write it in first person. So we're only going to have Brad's point of view on things. And then later in the series, we switch to his and his XO, Jessica Lynn's point of view, but it stays first person. I'm going to write it with some dark comedy, some humor, which I really hadn't had in my previous books. And I'm just going to make it a short, hard-hitting story. And at first I put it up, if you remember, it doesn't even exist anymore, but Kindle Vella, the old episodic. I put it up on there. It got a little bit of traction, but I think the curse of Vella was no one really ever read past the third free episode on anything. And so I only had a handful of people read to the end. I waited, I think it was 90 days for it to run its course on Vella, and then I moved it to Kindle. And almost overnight, it just started selling like crazy. And to this day, I have no idea why. Like, I really have no clue why that book in particular took off, except maybe because it was short. And there's a reason I named the series Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes. It's not just about the heroes' dumb luck, it's about my dumb luck as well. And actually writing a book to market almost by accident.
That's hilarious. That's fantastic. That's a great story. So, you have a full-time job, family. What
Yep.
does a typical writing day look like for you? Do you follow a strict routine or write when inspiration strikes?
I try to do a little bit of both, but I definitely trend more towards the when inspiration strikes, which unfortunately for my sleep schedule is usually somewhere between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. In fact, the most common thing is I'll be getting ready for bed, I'll jump in the shower, and then you have the stereotypical shower thoughts of, oh, wouldn't it be great if I did this? And then, my wife watches me get out of the shower, get dressed as fast as I can, and go grab my laptop and just start pecking away while she's falling asleep on the bed across the room and probably wondering, questioning all her life choices to end up with an author. And I'll write until either the creativity stops or I just can't keep my eyes open anymore. And I'm blessed in that I live in the Central Time Zone. My day job is in Pacific Time Zone, so I usually don't have to be online super early in the morning, which allows me to also get up in the mornings and write. Or if I have one of those marathon sessions late at night, I can sleep in a little bit and then, still face my day and get everything else that I need to done. I do try to write for an hour or two every night. But sometimes it doesn't work out. I've had days where I get through maybe 500 words, and I've had days where I get through 20,000 words in a
Oh,
single
wow.
session. And I'm not saying there are 20,000 good words that I can actually use, but it's 20,000 words. And when the bug hits, I just got to go for it because I don't know the next time it's necessarily going to hit.
That's awesome. Do you start with when you starting a series, do you start with world building, character development, or plot first?
I always start with character development. So, I'm definitely what you would call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. And in particular, I will sit down and try to kind of plot out what I think is going to happen. But my characters get in the way of that all the time because I've built this character in my head, and to me, they're very real. Um, a lot of authors talk about the voices in your head telling you what to write, and that definitely happens with me. It's the characters that I've built in this fantasy world that tell me what they're going to do. And so a lot of times when I sit down and plot something out, I get to an inflection point in the story and just realize as I'm trying to write this that there is no way that character would make the decision that leads to that path I was going to put them on. And a great example of this is when I actually, after the success of Worst Ship in the Fleet took me by surprise, I decided I'm going to write the sequel. And so I started writing a book called The Worst Freighter in the Galaxy, I think it was. And if you look that up, you won't find it because I never finished it. Because in the book, I had Brad and Jessica playing the role that, they're desperate for money after the events of the Worst Ship in the Fleet, and they're playing the role of reluctant enforcers to this mob boss, but they keep screwing it up because they keep like letting the people that owe the mob boss money go, and even helping them in a lot of different ways. But as I wrote it, I just realized there's no way these two characters, both of them from the Navy, both of them pretty straight laced before things messed up their lives, there's no way they'd even take a job like that. And so about halfway through, I abandoned it altogether and I rewrote book two and called it The Worst Spies in the Sector. And it took the series in a completely different direction than what I originally had planned.
Oh, cool. That's amazing. You're 9 books deep right now. How do you stay creatively energized when you're deep into a project like this?
Um, my family is a big help. I've got a daughter that reads like crazy, and I have finally, after 2 years of begging, gotten her to start reading my books and not just Rick Riordan and the fantasy authors that she tends to like more than me. But she will give me some input. I've got a lot of friends and family. It was actually though what really did it at the beginning was um, I was pretty close to giving up after those first two books went nowhere. And then I found out that there was this little group of people in my church, retirees, who had started reading my books as part of a book club, and they started giving me all sorts of feedback. And at the time, I couldn't afford a professional editor, but one of them had done some of that and was like, "I'll edit them for you. Just keep writing." And so they really gave me that shot in the arm. And I think a lot of people don't understand how much authors feed on the feedback that we get from readers. Um, I I try not to read every review because some of them are just a little depressing, some of the negative ones, but I do try to read the vast majority, even of the negative ones, and I will take things from those, both motivation and even ideas for where I can take the story.
Oh, nice.
And so I get a lot of energy, and I have an email list. I've got about 7,000 subscribers to my email list. I've got, I think, about 2,000 followers on Facebook and Instagram, and there's a few of them that are just always giving me feedback on the books, and I doubt they could ever realize just how much that impacts me and energizes me to go write the next story.
That's fantastic. Having that support system is crucial, and it's good that you had some local people there to really give you that shot in the arm. You said you write kind of both when you sit down at a specific time and when inspiration hits. What's your relationship with writer's block, and how do you overcome it when it hits?
Um, it hits quite often, uh, but I'm usually writing two or three books at a time. I'm
Okay.
writing I'm usually writing something in different series in parallel. So, for example, right now, I am writing book 4 of the Epic series. I'm writing book 9 of Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes. I'm writing book 1 of a series called The Worst Mercenaries in the Galaxy, which is another spin-off of Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes. And then I'm writing another project with another author. And then I've got a few little side things I'm sometimes writing and contributing to. And so I find that the best thing for me to do when I hit writer's block on one book is I switch to another. And oftentimes that simple act of pulling myself out of one universe or pulling myself out of one plot line and inserting myself into another is enough to get over the writer's block. And then sometimes I just sit down and I write nothing but garbage because the block won't go away, but I just do it because I need to be disciplined and do it and get my brain used to that routine.
I like that nugget right there. Like just sit down anyway and just write. Doesn't matter if it's good or not, but
Yeah.
get into that routine. I love that. You just mentioned that you're writing something with somebody else. What's that process like? How equal are you involved with it? Is it equal? Do you guys have like certain characters that you write? What's the process on that?
Yeah, so this is my first time writing collaboratively with another author, and his name is Stephen Gay. And we have book 1 of this series out called Black Sky Club, and book 1 is called Awakening. And we have we have penciled in 2 more books in the series, and we're actually getting together tomorrow morning to really plot out book 2 and start the writing process. He does most of the writing, and then I do the developmental editing, and then I hire the copy and line editors to help us go through, and then I do kind of a final revision. So the story is mostly his, the character's mostly his, but I'm giving him a lot of notes through the process. And so it's definitely a learn as we go because it's the first time. I'm definitely not like Jeff Chaney who can go out and write with a dozen authors at a time, and I don't know if I'll ever get to that point. But I do think that it's a good way to stretch yourself as a writer. It's a good way to reach new audiences who maybe like a different kind of sci-fi. This series is about AI, and it's about this AI, very advanced self-aware AI that implants herself, and she thinks of herself as in the feminine sense. She implants herself in the brain of this young guy, Orson Anders, and he has to basically make decisions throughout the course of the book. Is he loyal to her because there's people after her who want to capture her and use her for evil? Is he loyal to his friends who are being put in danger because of this? Is he loyal to himself? And so it's a little bit of an action adventure ride about what it means to be human versus machine, but it's also a near future dystopian. And all of my books are thousands of years in the future, or in the case of the Four Worlds, 700 years in the future. And so this is my first time writing anything near future, and so we're having to bring a little more of the science into it of what would a settlement look like on the moon. It's not when I'm writing 1,000 years in the future, I can wave my magic wand and say this technology now exists, and like no one knows how it works. Just like I can't explain to you how a cell phone works, I'm not going to explain to you how the jump drive works because the person explaining this in their head doesn't know how the jump drive works. They just know they have one in their ship. There's people that know how to use it, and it's going to get them from point A to point B. But you can't do that as much with the near future. You're expected to be able to understand a little more of what's going on and make it a little more realistic. And so we've got motorcycles and lunar rovers and things, and we don't have hover cars. We don't have spaceships that have all these magical devices that allow them to travel faster than light. So I'm having to do a lot more math on, well, at this acceleration, how long would it take to get from Earth to the moon or from the moon to Mars? And so that has stretched me as an author, and I think it's helping to make my other writing better because even with the thousands of years in the future magic wand, people will notice inconsistencies.
Hmm.
And so I've started paying a lot more attention to, well, if I said that from this jump point to this planet was 18 hours, I probably can't have this one be 3 hours. And I need to be a little more thoughtful about like how I explain the mechanics of the universe.
Right. No, that's interesting. Being able to do that. And you mentioned like, 1,000 years in the future, you don't have to be quite as scientific. I'm putting that in air quotes. It's funny because when you write that far in the future of with science fiction, it's almost the same as the people writing fantasy. Like you can create new worlds, and like you said, the magic of all the on the ships, and that's in air quotes as well. It really is kind of you're making up stuff that you don't have to necessarily explain every single scientific detail, but you have to explain just enough to where make it believable. Same thing with fantasy, like you have to explain the magic system that's just enough to, so sometimes it's hard magic where you really get in the nitty gritty, but lots of times you don't have to. That same with science fiction. Like you can either
Yep.
get as in depth as you want, or just enough to figure it out and to know and to explain to readers to get their imagination going and going. So um, I, I I like this new challenge for you. It
Yeah,
should stretch you, I guess.
I think the master at this is Brandon Sanderson, right? All these magic systems that he builds,
Right.
where he explains just enough where you know what's going on, but he leaves things open for interpretation, like why in the Stormlight Archives is it salacious for a woman to show one of her hands but not the other? Uh, or, how exactly does his investiture work and things like that. And so I've tried to look at what he does. I've tried to look at what authors like Timothy Zahn and Kevin J. Anderson and Orson Scott Card do, where there's some magic there, but they do explain enough. Um, what I find I actually have to resist doing is oftentimes I actually do want to jump more into like the science of things and reveal maybe too much too early. And so what I try to do is instead of writing myself into a corner of like, oh, I've explained it this way, so I can never use it a different way again, I try to reveal the science of the universe and the politics and everything else little by little as I write, so that I can give my characters, like we talked about earlier, that leeway to make certain decisions without me hemming them in too much by, oh, well, we've established that it works exactly this way, so it can't work any way else. And I think the writers appreciate that. One of the early critic reviews I got on The Worship of the Fleet was that the casual approach to sci-fi made it more enjoyable because it was like a character-driven military drama that just happened to be set in space.
Oh, nice.
And that's how I think about it. I try to get more into the character building and let the world building support the characters versus the other way around.
Awesome. Science fiction often explores what if questions. What's one concept or idea that's haunted your imagination long before it became a story?
Yeah. So, and this is maybe a little bit of a stereotypical one, but in the Four Worlds series, we deal a lot with genetic engineering. And I was asking myself a question of, what if there was a segment of the there there's people that believe different segments of the population today are different fundamentally. I don't happen to agree with that. I think we're all human beings and we're all trying our best.
Hmm.
But I had to think, what if there was a segment of the population that was notably and radically different? And so I thought a lot about it, and I came up with these four different types of genetic mutations. You've got readers who can touch someone and through skin to skin contact read a certain amount of their memories. You've got speakers that can quickly learn any language and mimic speech patterns and persuade people of just about anything. You've got enactors who are radically loyal to a single entity. In this case, they're raised from a young age to be loyal to the government, and it actually causes them physical pain to disobey an order. And then you've got blenders who, not through like Star Trek magic of changelings, but more through if they hang around with someone or a group of people for a certain period of time, they will start to change their physical features to look like those people. And so they're the spies, so the ones that go into a community, and within a week or two, they look like everyone else in that community, and no one, But for all they know, there's this one part in the book where one of the main characters is following a blender through some city sewers, and this blender is very plain looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, and then she starts talking to someone in Japanese, and he realizes, oh, I have no idea what her heritage even is because she looks like the average person in this part of town. Maybe she's Japanese. And so this to me was a fun challenge and a fun what if. And it's like, how would we act? And so in part of humanity, you've got these people being used by the government to basically keep the rest of the populace in line. You've got the readers reading people's thoughts and doing loyalty tests. You've got the speakers who are the politicians. You've got the blenders who are the spies, and the enactors who are the bureaucrats, because they're completely obedient to the government. But then when you go to a different part of human space, they've literally put them all on an island continent and said they're not allowed to mix with the rest of society because they're too dangerous. And so you kind of get into this open question of like, how would we deal with a part of humanity that evolves or is made to be significantly different than we are? And how, like, would we fear them? Would we embrace them? Would we allow them to take control? And I think that it's a little bit of the study into the human condition of how we do. We tend to fear anything that's different from us. Um, and in some cases, we tend to hero worship anything that's different from us. And you see a little bit of both of that in the series. So that was my favorite what if to explore. Um, the other big what if that I've explored in my other series is, you know, I know like Star Trek, you've got the Federation, you've got all of humanity under one banner. I don't think we can agree on things well enough to all be under one banner.
Right.
And so I envision if hopefully space travel one day comes the way that we envision it in sci-fi, I envision that there's going to be colonies of, there's going to be Chinese colonies, American colonies, Russian colonies, African colonies, Middle Eastern colonies spreading through space, where people are mostly from one region of Earth and model their government and maybe their culture very much after that region. And then you get this mixture between them that creates new cultures and new nationalities, but you'd never quite get to that monolithic one government for all of humanity because I just don't think that's realistic the way we operate as humans. And so I like to play with the different polities, the different government systems, languages, and everything that might result from that kind of uh, diaspora and then mixture of different human cultures.
Awesome. Now, you kind of answered this next question, but what truths or warnings do you hope readers take away from your work?
I think that one of the biggest ones is that progress isn't always good. It definitely can be, but if progress is not accompanied by some sort of a moral structure, we often end up shooting ourselves in the foot. I'm a fairly religious person. I try not to inject too much of that into my books because I write for a wider audience. But in the Four Worlds series, one of the central tenets of this government that uses these genetically engineered individuals to control people is that they've outlawed any ideology that doesn't coincide with the government's ideology. So there really aren't any political parties, and they've outlawed religion. And they've done this in the name of peace and order and keeping everyone marching towards a common goal. And I think we hear a lot of that. Um, but it's this problem of, well, if the government becomes the arbiter of everything that's right and wrong, and they decide that you as a person are all of a sudden wrong because you think differently than they do, you really have no recourse. You really have no higher power to appeal to. Uh, I also, and I don't quite do this as much as Frank Herbert did with Dune, but I have started to explore this idea of the overly popular, very charismatic leaders who can rally people to their cause, but their cause isn't always necessarily the right cause. And I've got one of those that has come into the Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes series, and it's this very kind of morally ambiguous princess, the daughter of the king of this group of a few hundred star nations. And sometimes she's, her father's kind of a nasty guy. Sometimes she's the one that actually keeps things in the light and prevents her father from doing bad things. And other times she's just ruthless and will do whatever it takes to serve what she views as the greater good. And we're going to be exploring her character a lot more. And her character comes into both that series and the Star Nation in Peril series and the new series I'm writing, The Worst Galaxies and Worst Mercenaries in the Galaxy, as this similar to the agent Heather Kilgore, who you ultimately actually find out actually works with this princess pretty closely. She's this character that you never quite know what she's going to do, but it's going to be in her best interest. And sometimes that's going to be good and benefit our characters, and sometimes it's going to be the worst thing in the galaxy.
Right, that's a great answer. Um, how do you balance hard science fiction and imaginative fiction? We kind of talked about this before. Do you research or let the story lead and fill in the gaps later?
I usually write the story and then go fill in the gaps later. Every once in a while, I'll stop and do a bit of research and try to figure some things out. I also keep pretty copious notes of the mechanics of each universe, so I have internal consistency. Um, I think readers will forgive a lot of that magic wand waving in far future sci-fi as long as you're consistent internal. If the rules change from one book to the next or one chapter to the next, you'll have angry readers, and I don't blame them. So I try really hard not to do that. And every once in a while, I will go back and rewrite a small part of a previous book and republish it because I realize that I did something in it that just doesn't make sense in the internal continuity of the story. Sometimes it's because I figure it out. Sometimes readers point it out to me, and I say, "Oh yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to go back and make the change, or I change the current novel I'm writing." Either way. I don't write hard sci-fi. I'd like to one day. I really would. It takes a level of research and focus that my ADHD brain just can't handle. Okay. Um, One day, you mentioned I have a day job. I also, my wife and I own a business, and then I do this writing. So one day, when hopefully my writing becomes big enough that I can actually do that full time, I would like to get in and write some real hard sci-fi because I love hard sci-fi. It's amazing. It just, and I am in utter awe and envy of the writers who can do it really well. Uh, it's just not me yet. And so it's something I'd like to develop later. But for now, I'm pretty firmly rooted in that space opera of we're going to have magic, jump drives. We're going to have magic gravity. We're going to have, magic implants that can do whatever they need to do in the moment inside someone's brain. And we're going to focus more on the characters, but someday I'll get to the hard stuff.
That'll be fun when you do. And you dropped a gold nugget. I don't know if anybody picked up on that or if anybody will pick up on that, but consistency is king. You talked about the consistency is, and you said the readers will forgive a lot if it's consistent. So if anybody's out there wants to do a long series, Skylar gave it a great point there. Now marketing, right? You gotta sell your books. Marketing is a challenge for many writers. What strategies have worked best for getting your books in front of readers?
Yeah, email list, I think is the stereotypical answer, and it's definitely worked out for me. Like I said, I've got about 7,000 subscribers. I do a lot of things to add to that list. It was zero 18 months ago, so it's grown pretty rapidly. Um, Followers on Amazon, you have no control over that other than getting people to read your books, but it's another super high value way to get in front of readers. But a lot of it just comes down to a mix for me of social media and ads on Amazon. I publish pretty much exclusively through Amazon. All my ebooks are exclusive through Amazon, except a few short stories. I do sell paperbacks other places, but for the most part, 99.99% of my sales are via Amazon. And so Amazon sponsored ads, both sponsored product ads, sponsored display ads, and then also sponsored brand ads are really my bread and butter. Um, and I took the ads for authors course that oh Brian Cohen does that a lot of authors have taken. I actually hired one of his people. I used them. I went a little deeper than the course, and I hired them at one point to consult with me and actually help me learn how to do all this myself. They taught me, and then they taught my assistant, who I'd hired at the time, who still works for me off and on. And then we've taught that to some other people that we've brought in to work with us over time on a part-time basis. And we follow that formula, but then we also play around a lot with stuff to see what works. So we've done still ads, we've done video ads, we've done ads targeted to products that maybe wouldn't like intuitively make sense for someone to buy that and then want to buy one of my books. But because we've thrown a lot of spaghetti at the wall to see what works, we find these little avenues sometimes that just don't make any sense, but actually drive sales. But for the most part, it's been about just doing everything I can to get the books in front of readers as often as possible. And I think this is where it becomes a really difficult, sometimes almost insurmountable challenge for a lot of new authors. Like I said, my first year and a half or 2 years almost after I published my first two books, I sold $300 worth of royalties. So, figure that was probably 150 copies. And I spent at least 3 grand, if not more, to get to that in just ad spend, like not even talking about time spent or cover art or just ad spend. And now my ad spend is profitable, but it's almost like you have to get the sales first, and then the ads can increase the sales and get them going. But no ad will turn zero into something on its own.
Mm.
You have to find that magic sweet spot that I somehow stumbled upon with the worship and the fleet. And only if you find that do you actually get to a point where the ads will do any good. Uh,
No, that's amazing. You said you basically had zero on your newsletter, zero people on your newsletter 18 months ago. For a new author that's starting out with zero, do you have any tips or tricks to get them, maybe not to 7,000, but maybe their first 1,000?
Yeah. So I use a lot of different things. I do a lot of swaps with other authors. I don't do quite as many now, but I used to do a lot of swaps with other authors via, there's apps like Story Origin and Book Funnel that really facilitate that. And I highly recommend it to any authors, because not only do you then grow your email subscriber list as you're swapping with other authors and showing people your books, but you're also showing your books, whether those readers in their list sign up for yours or not, they're seeing your books in their favorite author's newsletter. I have run Facebook ad campaigns that are literally sign up for my newsletter and get a free short story. And I don't know if those were actually, if the juice was worth the squeeze there. I think I probably paid more for each subscriber I got than those subscribers will probably ever return back to me, but it was a good way to grow it early on. A lot of my subscribers have come from book sweeps, and there's a site, booksweeps.com, where they give away book packages, and basically they, to sign up to get one of the free book packages or to be entered to win, they give you the option to sign up for all these authors' newsletters, the ones who are giving away books in the package. And I've probably gotten, I would say at least half my subscribers have come through those. And I'm definitely starting now to see that I've maybe tap that well for all it's worth. I don't know if there's people who are using that service who would sign up for my newsletter or haven't already, but I'm continuing to do it because it continues to bring in a few hundred every few months. But really, it's, I would think the other biggest thing, or I would say the other biggest thing, is I've just really put my newsletter sign up front and center in all my books, both before the story starts and right at the end. And so I get a lot of people who read the book, enjoy it, and say, yeah, sure, I'd like to be notified when something new is coming out.
Those are some great strategies. Now, you talked about a couple times about your first series, The Four Worlds, not doing very good. You pumped a lot of money into it, didn't bring any back, or not a lot back. So you moved on to Dumb Luck, Dead Heroes. Have you seen an increase in those sales as your backlist, has that grown as you have continued on with the series?
Oh yeah, big time. In fact, the Four Worlds is my second biggest producer of revenue and net revenue after ad spend right now. It's actually got my highest ROI on ads.
Nice.
And now part of that is because it's so big and beefy that, someone reads this with a Kindle Unlimited subscription, I get about as much from that as I get from people buying 3 of the short books straight out. Uh, and that's really the sweet spot for Kindle Unlimited, is the longer stuff,
Mm.
at least for authors. But I put almost all my books on it because I like just the idea of reaching a larger audience. But because it's actually funny now, because they're longer, I can afford to pour more ad spend into them, because if I get even one person to buy the first book, I've generally made my investment back on what it took to get them to buy that. Whereas with Dumb Luck and Dead Heroes, usually someone might have to read the first 4 or 5 before I really start to break even on the ad spend, and I do. And if I wouldn't be spending the ad money at this point if I wasn't making something off of it. But yeah, and that's kind of the greatest thing, is you get these loyal readers that will just start reading anything you've written. And I was worried because they are so different. The stories are so wildly different. Every once in a while, I get a review where they're like, well, this isn't funny like his other series at all. This is terrible. I couldn't keep track of all the characters. The other one was so much easier. And they're absolutely right, 100%. But then I get readers who are like, oh, I didn't know you could write with this level of depth. I didn't know you could write all these side characters because you have this first person and the other one. This is awesome. I want more. And so it's kind of almost become a problem in that I can't write fast enough in all these parallel series to keep up with people wanting the next book. But that I think has been the most fulfilling thing, because and this is maybe advice I would give to new authors as well. When that first book you write doesn't sell, you tend to really start to question whether or not you should be doing this. I spent 10 years writing that first book, off and on, not 10 years straight, off and on, usually when I was on business trips on a plane or something, back before they had reliable internet on planes and I could be expected to do any real work, I was sitting there writing. And, but, after 2 years of like no sales, I was really saying, maybe I'm just a bad author. And then I talked about that little group of, retiree readers at my church who was like, no, we love your stuff. Keep it coming. Gave me that encouragement. And now one of the most fulfilling things for me is seeing how much people like that original series, because it's kind of become this watershed thing for me of like, oh, okay, I don't suck as bad as I thought I did. I mean, I still do. I'm still not great. Like I am no like Orson Scott Card. I'm no Kevin J. Anderson. I'm no Timothy Zahn. I'm not even, a Jeff Chaney. Like those guys are light years ahead of me. But not as bad as I thought I was. And that's been very, very fulfilling, both as an author and then just as a human being, to actually think, wow, there are people out there that like this almost random mix of things I made up in my head over the course of 10 years. So yeah, it's been cool. In fact, I'm really working to get book 4 in that series out, which I was originally going to make it a trilogy, but because it's this epic that's been roiling around in my head for almost 15 years now, I had to make it 4 books because I just couldn't wrap it up. I tried wrapping it up in that 3rd book, and I was like, nope, more story needs to be told. And I am now dead set. That 4th book is going to be the last one, but I'm sure, maybe in a year, if you have me back on your show, I'll be talking about how I need to write the 5th book. I don't know. But that one's been a lot of fun and just a huge, huge sense of fulfillment that people actually have gone back and read it and like it.
Awesome. And great advice as well. Like just continue forward. You never know what's going to happen with whatever you've written.
Yeah.
Now, the first book that you wrote in the Four World series, super long, right? First book of this one, super short. The books in this series, the Dumb Luck series, they have gradually, I don't know, gradually gotten longer, but they've gotten longer. So,
They have, yeah.
what was the strategy behind that? When did you decide to go, okay, I'm going to write instead of 25,000 words, 75 to 125,000 words,
Yeah, in
or even
fact,
longer?
the book 8, I think, clocked in just under 100,000 words.
Uh-huh.
Um, obviously quite a bit thicker than book 1 there.
Right.
It was some of it was commercially driven, because I use Kindle Unlimited to reach the majority of my readers. You lose readers with every book in a series. And I've been lucky to have some incredible read through. I think at one point, 80% of the people who read book 1, 70 to 80% were reading book 2.
Oh, wow.
And they tell you to expect 50 to 60%. But even with that, and then from there, it's like 90+% between each book. But even with that, by the time you get to book 8, you're looking at a fraction of the people who read book 1. So some of it was like, hey, if I'm going to retain readers, I need to give them more in a sitting versus giving them these small bites now and again with too much time in between them for them to forget about me.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, there was just more story that needed to be told. When I wrote The Worship of the Fleet, I had zero intention of turning it into a series. I really didn't. I wrote it in a way where I could, but I remember just thinking, no one is going to like this book, because I was trying so many new things and it was so out of my wheelhouse. And it was like, it's not the slapstick, low stakes comedy of like the Bob and Nikki series, which, I mean, that guy could write a masterclass. And I know he's recently passed on, which is very sad for the writing community, but he could write a masterclass in that. Like, you just make readers feel good as they're reading. And it's not the hard-hitting, hard sci-fi of The Expanse. It's this weird amalgamation in the middle where it's like real stakes, people die, there's bad things that happen, and we don't shy away from that. But because I don't write swear words in my novels and I don't write explicit scenes, it's still suitable for a wide range of readers. but it's got that comedic element, and basically that comedic element is the fact that Brad Mendoza, the main character, is still a 12-year-old in his own mind. He acts like a kid all the time, and half the comedy is, Jessica Lynn, you know, the other main character, slapping him down every once in a while. And you're like, Brad, that's not okay. Like, you shouldn't do it that way. Go apologize to that man. Like, you didn't need to threaten his family because he wouldn't give us a cargo to ship. Uh, and but I had no idea it was going to take off the way it did. And so, as I've gotten deeper into it, the stories just needed more space to tell it. Because now I've got all these interlocking storylines, all these side characters that come into and out of it. I've got a series of short stories called the Brad Mendoza Chronicles that are also on Amazon and Kindle, where it's backstory of these various characters. And I've got the two side series, the Star Nation in Peril and the Worst Mercenaries in the Galaxy. And so it's just the demands of the story, the demands of the characters have forced me to write longer books, and I'm not regretting it. I'm now at the point now, hopefully, where people trust me enough to read the book, even if it's a little longer. And it's more fulfilling to write that way in a lot of ways as well.
Awesome. Well, time's about up here. I appreciate you coming on once again. What are some final thoughts that you'd like to share or give? And also, after that, do you want to tell people how they can get a hold of you, read your series? Obviously, you said Amazon, but if they want any signed copies, if you have those.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Final thoughts, man. Uh, First off, like, to all of your listeners, like, sci-fi is awesome. It's so much fun. And if you're the type of person who likes sci-fi, kudos to you, because I think that to be a sci-fi reader really requires you to think about the world in a different way. To be able to put yourself in the position of people hundreds, thousands of years beyond where we are today, and to be able to empathize with them, to be able to enjoy their stories, requires a really special kind of person. And that's what I think I love the most about sci-fi readers, is they are this eternally, even when we write dystopian, sci-fi readers are an eternally optimistic group. And they firmly believe that things will get better, and that people will continue to be good no matter what happens. And so, that would be kind of the big thought I'd leave with your listeners, is just like, you're the reason that we all write. If you weren't those eternal optimists who love thinking about what the future might bring, we wouldn't exist as sci-fi writers. We just wouldn't. In terms of getting a hold of me, my books are on Amazon. You can look it up just via my name, Skyler Ramirez. You can also email me, and I try to reply to everyone who sends me an email, whether it's an email out of the blue or in response to one of my newsletters. My email is Skyler, Skyler, at readpersephone.com. No spaces, no underscores, Persephone spelled just like it is in Greek mythology. And that's actually the name of the worship in the fleet, Persephone. It's also the name of my publishing imprint that I've started, Persephone Entertainment. So Skyler at readpersephone.com. And I promise I'll reply to you. I also try to reply to anyone who messages me on Facebook or Instagram. And you can follow me there. Just look me up by name and I will pop up. If you can't find me that way, throw the word author in and I'll definitely pop up. And I would love to connect. I love hearing from readers, and I love hearing what you like and what you don't like about the books.
Awesome. Are you going to any conventions or anything this year that people can meet you?
Yeah, I'm going to be at Author Nation, where you and I met. In that great meeting with Jonathan Yanez. And by the way, that's another piece of advice I would give to new authors. Build your network. Again, I think I mentioned that. Build your network of other authors. They will help you so much. Yeah, I'll be there. I'm actually going to be giving one of the seminars there. I'm going to be talking about how to scale your author business without quitting your day job, because that's something I've had to learn how to do the hard way. And I'm hoping I can share with other authors some tips and tricks that they could use. And then they actually emailed me today and asked me if I would speak on a sci-fi panel there. So I'll be doing that as well. And then I will be taking part in the Author Nation signing day, which runs that Friday. And this is in November. I forget the exact dates. I think it's like the second week of November in Vegas, but you can Google Author Nation and it'll pop right up. And I'll be signing books on Friday. If you email me, I have a Shopify store where I do signed copies. It's one of those long Shopify URLs, so I won't try to share it here, but I can definitely direct you to that as well.
Perfect. Skylar, I learned a lot from you today. I appreciate you getting on.
Well, thanks, Carson. I really appreciate you having me. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.